In this video, I will tell you about shocking medical practices of the Middle Ages, horrifying punishments, terrifying diseases, and more. This is the kind of Middle Ages you are definitely not taught about in school. Trepanation. Let's begin with one of the most shocking medical practices of the Middle Ages, trepanation. During this procedure, a small hole was drilled into the skull of a living person. For this, they used a tool somewhat similar to a modern drill. It wasn't doctors who performed the procedure, but barbers. These people could perform a wide range of tasks. They could cut hair, shave, or carry out various medical procedures, including trepanation. The procedure was often performed without anesthesia, causing the patient enormous pain. In addition, the tools used for trepanation were often crude and unsanitary, which increased the risk of infection and other complications. Despite these risks, trepanation was widely practiced throughout the Middle Ages. The procedure was often used to treat patients with severe head injuries or other conditions considered incurable. It was also believed that trepanation possessed magical or supernatural powers, such as curing mental illnesses or releasing evil spirits from the body. With the development of modern medicine, doctors were able to create safer and more effective treatments for head injuries, and of course, no real doctor today would attempt to release spirits. Cucking stool. Many know that the Middle Ages were notorious for their sophisticated and brutal punishments for crimes, including crimes that didn't even exist. One such punishment was the cucking stool. If a woman was accused of prostitution, foul language, witchcraft, or adultery, she was subjected to the infamous cucking stool. It looked like an ordinary wooden chair or stool, but it was mounted on the end of a large structure resembling a catapult. The accused woman was strapped to the stool with belts, and with the help of the device, she was lowered into the nearest pond or river, then lifted out and plunged back in again. Not everyone survived such a punishment, yet despite this, the cucking stool was considered effective for punishing women who were thought to be immoral. For example, in Britain, this type of punishment was used long after the Middle Ages, up until the beginning of the 19th century. Only then was this cruel practice abandoned. In many cases, the use of the cucking stool was accompanied by a public spectacle. Large crowds gathered to watch the punishment. The accused woman was often subjected to verbal abuse and even physical assaults from the crowd. Plague Doctor Mask, Black Death. You've surely seen images of this mask before. It was invented in the Middle Ages, and it is connected with the epidemic of bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death. In the Middle Ages, this disease spread across Europe and took the lives of millions. The disease was caused by a bacterium carried by fleas that infested rats. In the Middle Ages, people had very limited knowledge about the spread of disease and how to prevent it. The Black Death spread very quickly, with a mortality rate of 30% to 60%. One way people tried to protect themselves from this disease was by wearing masks. These were made of leather or fabric. The mask covered the nose and mouth and had a characteristic long beak. The beak was filled with herbs, spices, or vinegar. It was believed that strong smells could ward off the disease. These masks were worn by doctors, called plague doctors, and by others who were tasked with caring for the sick. Healthy people who wanted to protect themselves from the disease also wore them. However, the effectiveness of these masks is questioned today. Some historians believe they provided some protection by filtering contaminated air, while others argue they were ineffective at preventing the disease's spread. In addition to masks, people also tried other methods, such as burning herbs and using smoke to cleanse the air. They also practiced quarantine, isolating suspected patients from the rest of the population. The Black Death had a profound impact on European society, both in terms of human loss and in the social and economic changes that followed. Cockentrice. One of the strangest medieval dishes was the cockentrice. This dish was meant to impress guests at the dining table. The cockentrice was made by sewing together the front half of a pig with the back half of a turkey. The result resembled a mythical creature with the head of a pig and the tail of a bird. This dish originated in the Middle Ages and was served at royal feasts. It was a symbol of wealth and power, and only the richest and most influential could afford to serve it. Creating a cockentrice was a complex process requiring skill and patience. The parts of the pig and bird had to be carefully stitched together, then roasted for several hours. The cockentrice was intended not only as a spectacle but also as a delicious dish. The pork and bird meat were seasoned with spices and herbs, and the juices mixed together to create a unique and flavorful taste. Today, the cockentrice seems bizarre and even grotesque, but in the Middle Ages it was a symbol of wealth and prestige. Perhaps in 200 years people will be surprised to learn that in the early 21st century people ate caviar or steaks. Ordeals, trial by God. Ordeals, also known as trials by God. In the Middle Ages, ordeals were a type of trial. Essentially, they were physical tests imposed on the accused to determine guilt or innocence. The concept was based on the belief that God would intervene on behalf of the innocent. There were many different types of ordeals. For example, trial by fire. In this case, the accused had to walk across burning coals. Another example was trial by water. Here, the accused was thrown into water and had to float to prove innocence. Another type was trial by combat. The accused had to fight an opponent to prove innocence. While today this seems like a ridiculous way to determine guilt or innocence, in the Middle Ages many believed it was fair and objective. Unsurprisingly, many accused were seriously injured or killed in these trials. And of course, it's worth noting that those who stood trial were mostly poor. At the time, the outcome of a trial depended far more on social status or wealth than on actual guilt or innocence. Alchemy. Alchemy was a mystical and esoteric practice that gained significant popularity in the Middle Ages. It was believed that alchemists could turn base metals into gold, create an elixir of life, and unlock the secrets of the universe. The origins of alchemy can be traced back to ancient Egypt, where it was used as a tool of spiritual transformation. However, it was in the Middle Ages that alchemy became a prominent discipline. Alchemists believed they could achieve enlightenment and perfection by combining philosophical and scientific principles. In the Middle Ages, alchemy was seen as a way of discovering hidden properties of matter, including the ability to transform it into different forms. Alchemists were also fascinated by the idea of the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance thought to be able to turn any metal into gold. Despite its mystical nature, alchemy was also considered a legitimate scientific field. Alchemists developed techniques such as distillation, which are still used in modern chemistry. They also made significant contributions to medicine and metallurgy. The practice of alchemy continued into the Renaissance, but eventually declined as the scientific method rose to prominence. Today, alchemy is remembered as a curious and fascinating aspect of medieval history, full of symbolism and mysticism. CE. Teeth in trials. In the Middle Ages, teeth could play an important role during trials. One reason was that teeth were often used as a means of identifying individuals. With limited forensic technology available, teeth were one of the few reliable ways of identifying a person. This was especially important in crimes such as theft or murder, where the criminal's identity was often unknown. Teeth were also important in legal proceedings because they could indicate a person's age. In the Middle Ages, age was often a deciding factor in legal matters such as inheritance or marriage disputes. Teeth, especially molars, were reliable indicators of age because their wear could be examined over time. Knights. Medieval knights are often depicted as noble warriors in shining armor, defending their kingdom and honor. However, there are several shocking facts about medieval knights that are often overlooked. One of the most surprising facts about medieval knights was the prevalence of violence and cruelty. While knights were expected to follow the code of chivalry, many engaged in looting, rape, and even the murder of innocent people. Some knights were especially notorious for their brutality, and were feared by the very people they were supposed to protect. Another shocking fact about medieval knights was their role in the slave trade. Many knights participated in capturing and selling slaves, especially during the Crusades. They would seize men, women, and children, selling them at markets in the Middle East. In addition, medieval knights were very fond of hunting. For example, even then they used dogs to track animals and practiced falconry.